Hi KIB parents, welcome to week 3 of the Maximinds Mental Health Care webinar series for KRB. Today we are going to be looking at warning signs of mental illness in your girls and how to help you identify these behaviours at home. Given today's topic will cover mental illness, it references suicide. If this causes any distress or harm to you, then please feel free to stop the video at any time. As mentioned, I am a psychologist and you can reach out to me if you would like extra support. A reminder of the 8-part webinar series that we are working through, and this week we are on week 3, warning signs. So to get straight into the introduction, what will we be learning about today? Well, I would like you to come away hopefully with a general understanding of the warning signs for mental illness in children, and particularly teenage girls. How do you actually identify these warning signs and real strategies for you to practice? What are the specific signs for anxiety, depression, ADHD, conduct disorder, and eating disorders? And as we learned in the previous webinars, these are the 5 most common mental illness disorders in teenage girls in Australia right now, based on the statistics, and that is the reason that we are exploring these particular ones and how you can start looking out for warning signs that may lead to these illnesses. So what does today look like? We're going to go through the general signs and then how to actually identify those signs, and then look through those 5 common mental illnesses and the warning signs associated with them before a close. Just to recap from the last 2 webinar series, in week 1, we looked at mental health and what is that defined as, according to Maximinds. We believe it's about being present, in control, and in touch with reality. In week 2, we looked at mental illness and how we define it as being focused on the past and future rather than the present, feeling more helpless rather than feeling in control, and being more what we're calling delusional, or at least out of touch with that reality. And why I'm bringing this up again is that we're obviously talking about mental illness this week and how to spot beyond these 3 general theoretical signs of mental illness, what are the really specific practical warning signs you can be looking out for relating to different types of mental illnesses. So we're focusing on the extension of this mental illness on the right-hand side. And why is this important? The important thing for you to know about as parents is early detection equals early intervention, which equals greater outcomes. So just like when we have a physical issue or problem, the earlier we can actually identify and pick up those things, the better the outcomes ultimately are, because we can get involved and help manage and treat quicker. Each week you will remember that I do ask for a pre-test, a little quiz to answer a question. I'm not doing that this week, but I would ask at the end if you can give an indication of how that you develop your understanding, if at all, throughout the series of webinar. If you can please complete that at the end. To start with, the general signs of mental illness. How do we really define warning signs? Well, they're indicators or cues that suggest the presence of a potential issue or problem. They're observable patterns or changes in your child's behaviour, emotions, or well-being. The key things here to point out is that they are those indicators or cues. So just even at a high level, how can we start looking out for these sorts of things? And it could just suggest a potential problem. It's not necessarily signifying absolutely definitively. And in fact, I would caution against doing that. That's when you do end up at a psychologist, and get the professional help there. But from your perspective, they are at least observable patterns or changes. So you are in the best place to at least start that observation process so that you can start recognizing patterns and changes in their behavior. Patterns being what they tend to do enduringly, what are more personality traits that they seem to happen, and whether these start to cause any of that distress that we've talked about, the clinically significant distress. But more so, and perhaps more indicative sometimes of mental illnesses, as the sudden changes. And we'll talk about what that actually looks like. but they're the key things that you're looking out for, is how their behaviors, emotions, or well-being change. That's really important. So at a general level, there's obviously a lot to look out for mental illness. And these are some of the categories that I've tried to group them into. And we'll start with mood, concentration, energy, social, sleep, eating and exercise, physical, risk-taking, overwhelmed, esteem, and motivation. So what do these look like? These are very arbitrary, high-level concepts or warning signs at this stage, but specifically, and this is an important slide, obviously, to summarize overall the key areas, but also what are the specific behaviors you can be looking out for here. So in terms of mood, it's that emotional instability, mood swings above and beyond what would be expected of normal teenage hormone changes. Irritability, sensitivity. So you might find that they're particularly reactive to, say, their siblings at home, or find that if they don't get the dinner they want, for instance, they lash out and have a disproportionate reaction to what would be either previously expected of them, there's that change, or which would be bigger than what would be maybe their siblings would be doing. Concentration, so they'd struggle focusing on things, and it could include things like homework. It could also be, if you're traveling, could they even concentrate on attending to what has to happen at the airport, for instance? So looking out for all sorts of different signs when they can't actually focus. Making decisions, and also they have trouble doing that sometimes given their concentration's poorer, and that forgetfulness. Energy, this might look like being easily fatigued, quite tired, appear in a daze, or feeling zoned out. You might notice this more so on the weekends when you've got more time potentially to see how their energy levels are. It's important to know that if they're in a busy period with exams, for instance, that would of course be normal. It's when the energy levels are sustained throughout, for instance, the whole term, they're having that fatigue and they are sleeping at least well every night. The reason why energy is an important one is because it's not always necessarily just about having a good night's sleep. Energy can drop for those with mental illnesses, particularly with something like anxiety, because of the agitation that's going on in their minds, and they're constantly having to be on and busy reacting and having that hypervigilance, which is indicative of anxiety, which is very cognitively draining. So it could be that it's overloading them, and that's causing them to have that fatigue and tiredness. Social, you may find they're more withdrawn from friends, or tend to be more isolated, don't want to do anything on the weekend with friends, don't want to socialize. They might be changing friends, so constantly that instability and moving through groups, for instance, or suddenly fewer friends because they're becoming more withdrawn. Further to energy and independently is sleep. And as I mentioned, it's not always the energy will be low because they haven't had a good night's sleep. It could be because of other things. But with sleep, insomnia, which is of course not being able to sleep, or hypersomnia, having too much sleep. And again, probably above and beyond what would be expected of a teenage girl who likes to potentially sleep in on the weekends, catch up on sleep from the week, or likes to relax and chill out sort of more on the weekends. It's more than that. It's sleeping excessively. And then sleep disturbances, falling asleep or staying asleep. Also could be waking up really tired in the morning, every morning, despite going to bed at, say, 9 o'clock at night. Eating and exercise. This is in the extremes typically of these. So they're either eating more than they were previously, or less, or not at all the time. And that could also be with exercise, that they could suddenly take up something like running and become obsessively fixated on it, wanting to either for the reasons of losing weight or just becoming fixated on it. Or it could be that they've suddenly stopped doing all of the swimming that they used to love. So it's just looking out for those changes. Physical, As we know, the mind is very linked to the body and the body is very linked to the mind, particularly in the gut. But more generally in the body, you may hear them complain of things like headaches and stomach aches often. IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, is something, for instance, that they might always have issues with their bowels and feel like they've also constantly got a sore tummy. I do see a lot of that with children with anxiety, particularly. Restlessness as well, so that constantly moving their body, can't quite sit still, looking like they're on a motor, and we'll talk about that for aligning to things like ADHD. And of course, change in physique, which can link to things like eating disorders, but of course can be because they've stopped eating as much and suddenly, due to feelings of depression, for instance, and then dropping suddenly. Also with anxiety, can link to things like thyroid and hyper and hypothyroidism, which of course speeds up and slows down your metabolism, can also link to sudden weight loss and changes in the physique quite quickly, which then can also present it with anxiety symptoms. Risk taking. So on the weekend, starting to get involved with alcohol and drugs, potentially vaping, staying out late, particularly when you've said to come home, and fire setting. And I bring that up because that is one of the particular ones that's linked to conduct disorder, which we'll explore. But hopefully they're not setting any fires on at home. Overwhelmed, constantly worried or stressed, and about a range of things. And we'll talk about this as how this links to generalized anxiety disorder. But those sorts of feelings of overwhelm can obviously be for a range of mental illnesses. For instance, overwhelmed by the having to eat, for example, 3 meals a day, and having too much choice with that, so therefore they just reject it altogether. For example, esteem, negative self-talk, constant self-criticism. You could maybe hear them putting themselves down, feeling self-conscious and embarrassed by you as parents. Is, I think, teenagers across the board might be more likely to feel those sorts of feelings, but it's above and beyond, again, disproportionate to what your other children may also be experiencing. And lastly, motivation. So a lack of interest in activities, extracurricular and or socializing. This would be something to look out for, particularly in depression, as we've looked at last week, and that really clear criteria for depression, having that changed interest from previously, that they once enjoyed soccer, loved it, and then suddenly don't want to have anything to do with it and aren't joining the team anymore. This is a big list, but it's not a complete list. And obviously there are a huge amount of things to attend to. So what I'm going to try and do is break them down specifically to different illnesses for you. But at least this gives you some indication of the sorts of things you're looking out for at this stage. Further to that then, the key things to look out for are the changes. As I've mentioned a few times, sudden changes between their previous preferences, interests, body weights, etc., to how they've evolved and those things have changed. So that's more within them themselves. You're looking for changes or differences. In terms of atypical, then we're looking at more changes or differences between, say, your children, so that you can compare with, okay, well, if your eldest child was doing X, Y, Z, or didn't have such a negative reaction to not getting their way with dinner on the table, for instance, at that same age, then what might be happening for them? So using, if you can, as even though we don't try and encourage comparison between children, but more for your sense of knowing what key development milestones and behaviours and emotions would be normal or at least typical at different ages. So that's also can be for different peers. So if you can look across their peer group, what other sorts of typical reactions, behaviours, emotions that we would expect, and what would be considered then atypical. And lastly, looking for impact. And we've talked about this clinically significant distress previously. So it has to have an impact across multiple domains. So it's not just at home, which is why the interaction between you and King Koppel and being across with what's happening at school is really important, and vice versa, for them to know what's happening at home so that you can collaborate almost and make sure that there's consistency, or pick up then inconsistency of what's happening with what's happening in different environments. So they're the key things to look for. So on that last point of mental illnesses having to cause clinically significant distress, I want to remind you of the other ways that we define mental illnesses that must have all these criteria in order to denote an illness, as opposed to a time when children may be feeling a particular mood. So beyond that, that must be to that point enduring. It can't just be a point in time. So even if there is some sort of tragedy or event that happens that causes a potentially depressed mood at a time, after, say, a grandfather passes away, and they have that low mood and irritability for a while, it's dependent on how long that goes on for. And typically there needs to be a minimum time period in order for it to be a mental illness. To that point we spoke about earlier around the warning signs being potential indicators of mental illness, ultimately always suggest going to seek professional diagnosis rather than trying to rely on just these lists that I'm about to show you as the gospel. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And finally, remember, we're looking for more than just the naughty, inappropriate, or socially deviant behaviour, although that can be indicative of conduct disorder, which we're going to speak about as well today. So on to identifying signs. How do we actually do this at home, and how do you do it as parents? We do it by being hyper observant. And what does hyper observant really mean? Well, really, it's about being in tune to what's actually happening, really able to scan surroundings and attend to detail with quite high accuracy, really getting to know your child, knowing who they were when they were younger, who they even were last month compared to what they're like now. So we will talk more about why that's really important, and really, really understanding their strengths, values and interests, and we'll do that next week in next week's webinar. But other things are attending to what they may be doing that's atypical for them, but also atypical, as we looked at, compared to their peers. And this is important as it's really helping you to spot what's different or unusual. So that's one of the things that we do as psychologists. I'm giving you a couple of little ways to model what we do, given your roles as parents. But another strategy is, of course, cognitive behaviour therapy, which I briefly introduced in a previous webinar, which is the interaction between thoughts, feelings and behaviours. As parents, and unless you're psychologists or psychics or mind readers, it's much harder, obviously, to read feelings and also even thoughts, but what you can attend to are the behaviours. And so that's a good place to start. I want to really emphasize, what are the behaviours that you can look at? Because we've obviously already looked at what mental illness is according to children, and what are the thoughts and feelings more so that they would experience, but different to what you'll be looking for, which is observable behaviours. Another thing that we do as psychologists is empathize, obviously. And this is a model that looks at how do we empathize with people, and how could you empathize as parents with children. So typically what we want to do is observe what they do, say, and listen to what they say, but also try and infer what they might be thinking and therefore feeling. The ultimate goal, of course, is to understand at the root cause of what they're feeling, but again, not expecting you to know to do that, but it can help by observing and being more attuned to what they are saying and doing, to then help with those more deeper skills, which is interpreting what they're thinking and feeling. Again, probably that's more where you get a psychologist involved if it is that what they're doing and saying is already causing concern. So how do we even attend to at least the doing and saying? Some of you may be familiar with the 7-38-55 rule, which is based on a psychologist's theory back from the 70s. So still resonates, and I think it applies across a lot of domains. But in the case of this for children and observing them, it's important to note that when they're communicating about their feelings, emotions, and attitudes, their communication's made up of verbal, vocal, and facial in the given ratios. So approximately 7% of what they say in terms of verbal, 38% is in terms of vocal, so pitch, tone, if they yell, scream, are they angry, stern with you? And then most importantly is facial features and expressions. By extension, I also think of that as the body movements, the gestures, and things like that. So, for instance, they may be saying, yes, mum, I'm fine. And verbally, sure, they've said they're fine. Vocally, that's quite stern, indicating that that's probably not the case. And if their facial is that they're looking down or not making eye contact with you, then of course what they've said is far less important than how they've said it. So we're really attending to the non-verbal cues more so than the verbal. Just to remind you of what to then attend to. How do we do it? We attend to what's changed in them. So how have they changed even from a month ago? If they used to really love soccer and now they don't want to play soccer, then what's happening? Is there a reason for that? Is it atypical? So we're attending to how is it compared to their peers, perhaps their siblings, other children, cousins, things like that. And of course, also attending to what's happening at school. So really trying to learn about what's actually happening with them, what extra pressures may they have between homework, exams, assignments, because they do have quite busy and complicated lives themselves and a lot of different activities and balls in the air for their age and stage. So it's important to be mindful of what's happening there as well, again, because of that importance of having to be across multiple domains. So they may just be moody and grumpy with you at home, but if they're not the same at school, then that's probably more of perhaps teenage rebellion and pushing back where they know they can at home versus having a mental illness that's impacting both school and home. So to remind you of mental illness, this is the way that we look at it in terms of being focused more on the past and future, helpless and delusional. The reason I'm bringing that up is, of course, we're wanting to explore how, within those, what are the mental illnesses that are most relevant to unpacking today. This is an overview of all of them. Not all of them that you may be familiar with. Of course, there's a lot more, but some of the ones we have explored and the ones that are most common in teenage girls in your children at Kincoppal. So firstly, we have anxiety is the highest, almost 1 in 3 with anxiety. According to the statistics, about 1 in 5 with depression, 10% approaching that for ADHD, and then 6% for conduct disorders and eating disorders. From my own personal experience with working with teenage girls, including those at Kincoppal, and also the broader trends of what we're seeing coming out and developing, the ones that I think are the most important to start looking at closely with these girls is anxiety, ADHD, and eating disorders. I think anxiety is only going to continue to increase, unfortunately, amongst this demographic. ADHD, as we talked about last week, has been very underrepresented in females, not because I don't think they necessarily don't have it, but because they have previously demonstrated different qualities or behavioural indicators or warning signs than boys have in the past. So that is rising. And a lot of older adults are finding that they are getting late stage diagnoses of ADHD. And lastly, eating disorders. I do think this 6% is very low, given it's just a reported stat. I think it's much higher, to be honest, particularly in, for instance, private girls' schools, places like Sydney and the eastern suburbs, and I also think that's definitely growing. So to start with, we are going to explore anxiety and what are the warning signs as the most common mental illness in teenage girls. we will return to the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and we looked at this last week in a number of other disorders, but I thought I'd bring this one here for you, given generalized anxiety disorder is arguably the most common and most generalized. So if you can get an understanding of what is actually anxiety according to the DSM, and we can start to use this as indicators for the behavioural signs that you're looking out for. So more days than not for at least 6 months over about a number of different events of the below criteria. So in terms of the actual symptoms, the first thing is it's important to note that it's difficult to control the worry. That's, I think, worth calling out because most people with anxiety have a constant loop in their head of what's going around and around. They're constantly what we call ruminating, catastrophizing what's happening, and they find it very difficult to stop. It's almost like this comparable to, say, addiction. It's not something that you would choose to have, and it goes round and round, and they cannot control it. So it's happening. It's beyond just being able to tell them, "We'll stop. There's nothing to worry about. Don't worry about it." Those sorts of things. They actually, you can't almost stop it without intervention. So they must have only one of these below given their children. So in any 6 months, they have to either have, or a combination of these, the restlessness or feeling keyed up or on edge. So you might observe that as being quite fidgety, not being able to sit down properly, seeing their knuckles almost be quite tense. That's also number 5, the muscle tension. You might see them clench, be quite rigid, their shoulders feeling like quite a lot of weight in their bodies. Easily fatigued, also linking to number 6, sleep disturbance, but not necessarily caused just by sleep disturbance alone, as we talked about, particularly with anxiety. This fatigue comes from that constant rumination, hypervigilance that goes through their head that we just talked about. They have to be on edge all the time to stimuli. I was reading something only actually this week about how people with anxiety tend to be really good in an emergency because they're already constantly on guard and looking out for threats. So if they're also good in emergency, maybe that's another warning sign unofficially. They do find it difficult to concentrate, possibly, again, because of the thoughts that are going through their head. They've already got a million things running around. So finding it difficult to focus. Irritability, which comes with probably all of that just annoying feeling of happening, things that are going around, this circular, never-ending cycle that's going on. So we're looking for those sorts of things, observing them. How do we actually observe those in our children? So mood clearly is a big one here. So you're looking for that emotional stability, mood swings, irritability, picking fights with siblings, being reactive, not necessarily that stable with their emotions, not having as much of that emotional regulation. The concentration, so they might struggle to focus, make decisions, that forgetfulness, find it hard to concentrate on their homework at home. Energy, easily fatigued, so they might appear almost dazed or zoned out, waking up feeling a bit sluggish even when they've had a good night's sleep. Physical, appears restless, as we talked about, those tense muscles, the clenched hands, the grinding of the teeth. There's also some links to teeth grinding for those with anxiety, and if they've got dental issues there. Overwhelmed, constantly worried. If you can constantly see their stress and they're worrying about not only their upcoming exams, but also whether the dog's okay and is he going to be okay in the upcoming vaccinations or vet visit, as well as worrying about whatever's happening with the weather in the holidays or something. So there's a whole lot of different things that they can be overwhelmed and stressed by, and just listening out for those sorts of things that you can see that they are concerning them. And of course, lastly, sleep, something that's really important for you as parents, obviously, to keep track of, given you're the ones at home with them all the time. So hypersomnia, insomnia, sleep disturbance, just struggling to fall asleep and having to really have a big wind down process almost at night. And we can talk about sleep hygiene as well, if that's something, because we are releasing a new feeling soon called I'm feeling tired. And that's where there'll be a lot more of strategies to help with that. So now I want to show you a video about how to use these warning signs beyond just this webinar, and how to actually apply them to your children, and also what to do about those. To help remind you of these warning signs and then how to apply them to your child and what to do if they're feeling certain feelings, you can go into features, quizzes, and then take quizzes. And here you'll be able to take a range of quizzes which give you the option of different behavioural symptoms or warning signs and help them apply to your child, and then direct you to the best resources. So a bit of admin to start. And then, as you'll see, you'll be presented with a series of different behavioural symptoms, which you can go through, just learnt about, and how they apply to your child specifically in the last 2 weeks. So I'm just giving you an example of how this could work, given we're talking about anxiety. Then you'd click submit. And here it will give you results based on those behaviours. And here it says it appears your child has been experiencing a bit of anxiety this week. We suggest taking the quiz again in another few weeks, but in the meantime, you can click on managing anxiety. And here you'll be presented with a range of different tools and resources you can use. So we've just taken the quiz. You could watch a video, read some articles, for instance, to learn more about anxiety, and then help them with certain strategies, all 1 minute, quick and easy, and even download activities for them to complete. Moving on to the next most common mental illness disorder in teenage girls and your children is depression. So a reminder of what the DSM defines major depressive disorder as we looked at last week. Key things I want to focus on here, reminding you that it could be one or both of those first 2 symptoms. So must have depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. And as we've already talked about in children, this can be a really irritable mood. So you're just noticing that they're just frustrated easily, a bit snappy, particularly would be more likely to present, I suspect, at home rather than at school. So this is where parents, you have a big role to be catching that after school, on the weekends, in holidays, and or the diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities nearly every day. So this goes just above and beyond the things that they used to enjoy. It could just be they don't want to do anything with any of you at the family. They don't want to socialise on the weekend. They don't want to go to school. They don't want to do extracurricular activities anymore. They don't want to do their homework. That constant and quite invasive and pervasive displeasure in a lot of things. In addition to one of or both of those, there needs to be 3 to 4 more of these symptoms in the same 2-week period. So weight loss or weight gain, or a decrease or increase in appetite. That is something definitely that you can keep an eye on with dinners and also breakfasts, things like that. So those 2 meals of the day, and also the weight loss and gain. It's very tricky to see day to day whether that's changing, but it's almost doing an audit every month, and particularly change or loss of more than 5% of body weight in a month. But just keeping track, using your doctor as a way to measure and keep that at the back of your mind. Insomnia or hypersomnia, so not being able to sleep or sleeping too much. Psychomotor agitation or retardation, which is symptoms that you might see like pacing around the house, tapping, fidgeting, fiddling, rapid talking, all those sorts of things. Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. So waking up in the morning every day for school and just being exhausted, and coming home, same sort of low energy. Feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt. Those things, they're the things that we talked about there, which are a bit harder to infer. But if you can hear and attend to their posture and behaviours, and how's their face every day, are they smiling and enjoying what they're doing either at school or outside, having interests, or do they feel like they're just not good at anything, feeling guilty about those sorts of things? diminished ability to think or concentrate, or indecisiveness nearly every day. This could be something that you can definitely observe, whether they can sit down and concentrate for an extended period of in the afternoon, obviously age appropriate, but doing homework, how long can they actually sit there and concentrate for that? Are they decisive or indecisive about what they want to do on the weekend? Are they not sure? They don't want to make any decisions. They just don't really want to engage from that perspective. And recurrent thoughts of death. This is obviously the suicidal ideation that we talk about as being a signpost of depression. Very hard to pick up, but the things you can listen for are the fixations or thoughts, the fixations more so in terms of their talking about death, dying, not necessarily just a fear of it, but those sorts of things. Again, it must cause clinically significant distress, which is why it's important to notice whether these things are happening also at school, or is it just at home when they're able to be, inverted commas, more relaxed and more like themselves, and you're just seeing the brunt of it. So what does that look like for you to look out for as parents? So the mood, as we spoke about, mood swings, irritability, potentially appearing tearful, and thoughts or discussing death, bringing it up. There's no harm also, of course, in asking if it comes to that point, by which stage you would have hopefully already sought help with a psychologist or some intervention, but asking point blank, have you had any thoughts about death or dying, is actually not going to bring up more issues or thoughts like that in them. It's more of a relief that someone's actually asked the question. So we know that you will not remind them, inverted commas, of death and dying if you bring that up and make it worse. You do make it better by asking the question point blank. Concentration, you may notice that they struggle focusing, as we spoke about, on homework, but not only that, also other things. Are they flighty with their thoughts? Are they indecisive? Do they forget things? Are they forgetting books from school, or are they forgetting to take them? Are they forgetting they had a big assignment due? Are they forgetting that they had an important interview or something for school? Are they forgetting their sports stuff? Energy, excessive fatigue, loss of energy, tiredness, again appearing in that daze. Physical, psychomotor agitation or retardation, as we spoke about, is the buzzingness around almost, or the opposite, which is they just want to be horizontal, veg out all the time in front of the couch, not want to do anything, stay in their room, and that weight loss or gain of 5% within a month. Sleep, insomnia or hypersomnia for depression is very big, very disruptive to sleep. As I mentioned, we are having I'm feeling tired just because of the rise we're seeing of how important sleep is. And I do think fundamentally, one of the key takeaway is the importance of sleep in both a cause and a symptom. And we talked about that last week, that two-way street. So lack of sleep can then lead to mental illness, and likewise mental illness can interrupt sleep. So at a bare minimum, making sure they're getting that 9 hours of sleep, ideally for a teenager a night, is crucial for both preventing and helping with mental illness. Eating and exercise, more in the extremes, given the weight loss or gain, it could be one factor, or it could be because of that hypervigilance that they might have if this is, for example, comorbid with, or also comorbid being if they also have anxiety with depression, which we often see quite commonly together, because it's, again, another two-way street. They can both lead to each other and exacerbate those. But if that energy is causing them to either gain weight or lose weight, independently of also the eating and exercise. So it can occur without necessarily just having less food or more food, less exercise and more exercise. But typically, as we can see, if they've got that hypersomnia and they sleep a lot, they're not doing much, and then they're eating, they're of course not doing that exercise, and that can lead to weight gain. Esteem, negative self-talk. So catching them, how do they talk about themselves if they're introducing themselves to, say, friends, or catching up even at, birthdays or big family functions? Can you hear them talk about themselves in a positive way? Are they proud of what they've done at school this year, or do they just not want to talk about it? Do they have that, meh attitude, or do they speak with enthusiasm about themselves, or at least able to contribute? the constant criticism, the worthlessness and the guilt, and motivation, diminished interest or pleasure in activities, which we covered is not just necessarily things that they used to like, but also just general day-to-day things, even not wanting to shower, not wanting to put on deodorant, do their hair, get dressed on the weekend to go out, that sort of sluggish whole motivation that goes across all facets of their lives. As we saw for depression last week, one of the key indicators here, or the key impacts, has obviously is on that self-care. So looking out for whether they are interested anymore in making an effort, so to speak, by doing those really basic things, which are, wearing, nice clothes, for example, if they're going out on the weekend with friends, or do they firstly not even want to go out, let alone put on anything nice when they used to like doing that, for instance. Again, I will show you how you can make sense of these warning signs and apply them to your children and help direct you to suitable resources in terms of what to do once you spot these warning signs. Further to what we explored before with anxiety, you can do the same with taking the Down quiz and using this to help identify the types of warning signs you may be seeing in your child. And again, it'll ask you over the last 2 weeks a range of different behaviours that you may have seen in your child. Again, click submit and it will give you a result. So in this case, it appears your child has been feeling quite down. In this case, we would suggest that you book them in with a psychologist if they're quite elevated on those scores. Here is the link for them to book an appointment. To book them an appointment. You can make an appointment here, but you can also read through some of the facts and frequently asked questions that often come up for parents, particularly how can I bring it up with your child, and other details that you might want to know about booking a psychology appointment. Further to what we explored before with anxiety, you can do the same with So moving on to the third most common mental illness in teenage girls is, of course, ADHD, another one that I think is on the rise. So a reminder from last week, what is ADHD? ADHD is attention deficit and hyperactive disorder characterized by inattention and or hyperactivity and impulsivity. So they could have one subtype being inattention, or they could have hyperactivity and impulsivity, or they could have both. And I'll show you what that looks like according to the DSM. So inattention subtype is defined by having 6 or more of the following symptoms in the last 6 months, and it impacts directly on their social and or academic activities, so that clinically significant distress. So they may have a failure to give close attention to details or make careless mistakes, difficulty sustaining attention in tasks, for instance, when they're sitting there doing their homework, or whether it be talking in a group, are they able to keep up with the conversation, for instance. Doesn't seem to listen when spoken to directly. Maybe common or typical teenage behaviour being selective hearing, but more so than that, when they're sort of in a different world almost, their attention's definitely elsewhere. They don't follow through on instructions, or difficulty organising tasks and activities. So that one's could be around, organising things for school. Do they have good time management? Are they meeting their deadlines with homework and assignments? Are they missing assignments? Are they able to get all their clothes ready for sport? Are they bringing the textbooks home that they need to, for instance? Reluctant to engage in tasks that require sustained mental effort. So that's definitely the homework. And for the older adolescents, could be doing things like, preparing for HSC, obviously something that's quite important, and again, typical students would be motivated to achieve and want to perform. But if they've not able to do that and not able to sit down for, the 2-hour practice paper or 3-hour practice paper, then to do that at home, those sorts of things, that would be something to think about or attend to. Loses things necessary for tasks or activities. So school materials, leaving, losing blazers and hats, or constantly forgetting where things are, maybe leaving things all over the house, not collecting their washing from the laundry, all those sorts of things, easily distracted by extraneous stimuli. So that could be from things that are happening at the home environment, for instance, siblings running around or the TV on and they sort of get distracted, or it could also be that they're sort of in their own mind thinking about different thoughts and things, which is causing them to be distracted and forgetful in daily activities. Again, it's very hard to tell whether this is a teenager that are just choosing not to do chores or they're genuinely forgetful. So I'm sure, and that's why you as the parents are so necessary in helping these spot these signs, is because you probably know more enough about whether they're deliberately trying to just avoid doing the dishwasher or cleaning, or are they genuinely forgetting that they were meant to do that. So knowing that nuanced behaviour is really important for you as parents to look out for at home. As you can see here, a lot of forgetfulness, inattention, on the inattention subtype, obviously. On the other hand is the hyperactivity or impulsivity subtype. And again, they have to have 6 or more of the following symptoms in 6 months, which directly impact both home and school life. These things we're looking for is the fidgeting, tapping, squirming in the seat, more so, perhaps more elevated than that psychomotor agitation that we just saw in depression, because of course that can be more retardation as well. For ADHD, it's typically more on the agitation, so they're a bit more buzzing. They leave the situation, they're meant to be sitting, for instance, at the dinner table, and you're all sitting on the couch, maybe watching TV, but they want to get up and they've got to keep doing jobs and things like that. The running or climbing, not sitting still, don't really like to, or not able to necessarily engage in leisure activities quietly. So they want to be go, 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 doing, which is the on the go driven by motor. Talk excessively, sort of like I'm doing now, very quick, blurts out answers, things haven't been, even questions haven't been finished, always waiting their turn, interrupting, intruding others. So maybe always being the first to answer in front of the other siblings, or always knowing, always wanting to go first or wanting to be at the front of the line, all those sorts of things. So that's the hyperactivity subtype. Both of these, regardless of which subtype or both, must be present prior to the age of 12 years old. And I think we spoke about this last week, which is why we go to speak to junior school teachers as well, and they're really thinking about what they used to be like in a junior school, so that you can understand whether these were present before 12, because that must have been the case if you are to get an ADHD diagnosis. So it's not just because school is now overwhelming in high school and there's a lot more to take in, it's that these were already present all throughout their childhood, earlier childhood. And they're present in 2 or more settings, which we've covered, and interfere with the quality of life in both home and or school and or, say, a part-time job they may have. So to summarise those as simply as possible for you, the first one that we looked at, the inattention, maps onto this more concentration warning signs you're looking for. Do they struggle to focus on homework? Do they struggle to make decisions? They're indecisive? Are they particularly forgetful, and not as a way of evading or getting out of things, but genuinely forgetful? They can't quite remember where they put things. They can't quite remember what they had on, and distracted and more inattentive. So that's more the concentration. The other one, the hyperactivity or impulsivity, is more of the physical symptoms and warning signs you're looking for. The restlessness, the agitation, the running about, jumping around, moving fast, quickly, leaving dinner table, coming back, sitting on the couch, moving, going again. As you can see, they're very flighty. They're just very distracted, very, fidgety and busy on the go. So that's probably the simplest way to think about the inattention, is the concentration, and they're not able to attend, versus, of course, the hyperactive and impulsivity is more the physical. You'll see that. Both of them will have different social warning signs as well. So the poor listening and failure to follow instructions, more likely inattention. Again, not necessarily deliberately, but they just don't have enough capacity to be attending to those things. And on the flip side, for the hyperactivity, can more be of the talking excessively, blurting out answers. Both of which can lead to, of course, friendship challenges if they're not listening to them, or talking so much and just blurting things out. As we looked at last week, in order to get a diagnosis for ADHD and work out which of the subtypes or both this is present on, we do ask the individual, but also yourselves as parents and also the teacher. And the teacher being both a high school and or a junior school, given your girls are all now in high school, the teacher one we would typically ask a high school and a junior school teacher for. So there's quite a lot of different perspectives, which helps to assess whether there is that clinically significant distress. Moving on to conduct disorder, and I will skim over this as quickly as possible because I'm hoping it's not necessarily applying to girls at Kincoppal, just because I don't think it's as aligned to probably overall my experience with the girls. There may be a few, statistically there will be some, but just to give you an overview and the quite aggressive symptoms here. So at least of the following in the last 12 months. So as you can see, bullying, threatening or intimidating others, initiating physical fights, using weapons, cruel to people, cruel to animals, stolen while confronting a victim, force someone to a sexual activity, engaged in fire setting, destroying others' properties, broken into someone's house, lies to obtain goods, like cons others, stolen items of non-trivial value, stays out late, this is related to you particularly, stays out late despite your curfew or saying no, beginning in junior school, so before the age of 13 typically, runs away from home overnight at least twice, truants from school, again beginning before the age of 13. So quite a big list there. Just need 3 of those in the last 12 months. To summarise those is the social aspect, the bullying, threatening or intimidating friends or siblings, the physical fights potentially at home, the physically cruel to siblings, friends, even family pets, other animals we might see. We saw there was that criteria regarding animals. And then obviously the biggest symptom here, warning sign, of the risk-taking behaviours, destroying property, treating their room and also their property, their possessions, but also their siblings' properties and possessions not very well, disrupting the whole environments, stealing, lying and conning to you, siblings, staying out late despite your curfew, starting in junior school, running away from home at least twice, truancy from school before the age of 13, and then I've just put in some other things that might be worth looking for as early indicators, excessively engaging in alcohol and drugs, and obviously engaging that before they're 18, so virtually all of years 7 to 11, vaping as a not necessarily indicative conduct disorder, but these are the sorts of examples that would give you staying out late, fire setting. Again, how to diagnose, there's an element within a questionnaire we use, which is specifically around the conduct disorder and asking the teacher and the parent about that and the specific items on that, which must have been not only in the last 6 months or year, but also, as you'll see if you can look closely, when you were a child age 5 to 12 or when they were a child age 5 to 12. And last but not least, we have eating disorders, which are the 5th most common mental illness disorder amongst teenage girls. And as mentioned, I believe one of the fastest growing in this demographic. A reminder that there's a few different types of eating disorders, the most common one being binge eating disorder, which we're going to look at. Of those who have an eating disorder, almost 1 in 2 have binge eating. And we also have anorexia and bulimia. We've looked at them last week, so we're going to look just again at the particular warning signs for binge eating disorder. A reminder that these recurrent episodes of binge eating must happen in a discrete period of time, for instance, within a 2-hour period, and there must be a lack of control over eating during this episode. During each of these episodes, there must be 3 or more of the following behavioural indicators or warning signs. So eating much more rapidly than normal, eating until feeling uncomfortably full, eating large amounts of food when not actually physically hungry, eating alone because of embarrassment, feeling disgusted with oneself, depressed or guilty afterwards. There must be a marked distress regarding eating, and it must occur at least once a week for 3 months. So the sorts of things that you're looking out for as parents at home come under these main warning sign categories. So social, we read about just then, the withdrawal or isolation. So potentially not wanting to eat at the dinner table, or leaving the dinner table and coming back, perhaps going to the bathroom, for instance, either immediately after eating. This may also impact their socialising and whether they want to go out for, say, dinners on the weekend with friends, or avoid all those activities altogether, typically because a lot of activities do seem to happen around food, or at least meals, when they're doing those sorts of things with friends on the weekend. Physical, so a rapid change in body physique, and this could be either increasing in weight or decreasing. So it's not always that decreasing or weight loss that we're looking at for binge eating, even though that's what's more stereotypically associated with, say, anorexia. And we looked at this again last week, the concern with appearance, something that I've picked up, so, wearing more makeup, which is above and beyond what would be expected for a teenage girl who's discovered, makeup and things like that at that age. Other things to look out for: esteem, appearing disgusted with themselves, as we looked at. So harder for you to infer as parents, but looking for that more shame or disgust in themselves after eating or around eating. Negative self-talk relating to food or not, or otherwise. Constant criticism regarding themselves, whether that be with eating, concerned with how many things they've eaten, but also the criticism more generally regarding potentially, say, schoolwork, or just noticing that they're got that low self-esteem when applying to themselves, and being more embarrassed than typical, for instance, as a teenager, being embarrassed by you as parents potentially, but above and beyond compared to, say, their siblings or other peers their own age. So they're the things we're looking out for binge eating warning signs, and by extension, eating disorders. To summarise, we will go into what we learnt today, and just ask that after I go through this summary, if you can please scan the QR code to give us some feedback as to what you did or didn't learn today, and the feedback, if you have any going forward. There's just, again, one question. So what did we learn today? That warning signs involve a range of behavioural characteristics. They're observable patterns or changes in a child's behaviour, emotions, or well-being. They include behaviours relating to, but also not limited to, mood, concentration, energy, social, sleep, eating and exercise, risk-taking, esteem, and motivation. And they're identified by attending to changes, particularly within themselves, atypical behaviours, typically compared to peers or siblings, and their impact on both school and home to constitute that clinically significant distress. Specifically, in anxiety, warning signs include mood, concentration, energy, sleep, physical, and appearing overwhelmed. Specifically, in depression, warning signs relate to mood, again, concentration, physical, energy, sleep, but also the eating and exercise, esteem, and motivation symptoms. Specifically for ADHD, warning signs concern concentration for the inattention subtype, physical symptoms for the hyperactive or impulsive subtype, and or social, and or a combination of these. Specifically to conduct disorder, warning signs relate to social, and particularly that risk-taking. And finally, for eating disorders, concern social, physical, esteem, and eating and exercise. As mentioned, if you could please just scan the QR code and answer one question for us, and any other feedback you had and questions for going forward, then please do that. I'll just give you 20 seconds. Thank you very much. Finally, resources, as always, emergency contacts for you to have on hand. Maximize is also available 24/7 access, where you can access these tools that we've looked at today, particularly the quizzes. Above and beyond that, all of the other options here are available to you for free for 3 months. And you can scan the QR code here to access that. And here are my contact details, as always, if you have any questions throughout the week. And thank you for attending, and I'll see you next week.